Hello and welcome to this virtual roundtable series from Foodservice Consultant Society International, FCSI, focusing on ventless innovation in food service. I'm Michael Jones from Progressive Content and Editorial Director of FCSI's Foodservice Consultant magazine. This roundtable series is very kindly sponsored by the Middleby Corporation and will address how ventless technology is helping operators to utilise dead spaces in food service settings. We'll also look at how myths about ventless technology can be dispelled and look at how forward-thinking consultants are able to harness this technology for the benefits of their clients. Today, in this episode, we'll be focusing specifically on ventless innovation in stadia food service projects. I'm delighted to be joined today by our expert panelists, which includes three leading FCSI professional member consultants, Kristin Sedej, Chris Bigelow and William Caruso, and Scott Heim from Middleby. I'll now ask each of them in turn to introduce themselves and also tell us a little bit about their business and their area of expertise. Ladies first, Kristin, can we go with you, please?
Good morning. I'm Kristin Sedej, and I am the president of S2O Consultants with my partner, Harry. Been in business about 17 years. I would say a very large portion of our market segment is in the sports and large venue. However, I also do work in schools, K through 12, hotels. With an operations background, it takes me into different market segments. And the only thing we don't touch is healthcare and corrections.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kristin. And Chris, over to you.
Chris Bigelow Companies, and our company is strictly focused on sports and entertainment venues, convention centers, performing arts centers, stadiums, arenas. And I've been doing this for 45 years or something like that. Started as an operator with two of the large food service companies, and then created the consulting side back in 1988. And so have been doing this ever since.
I'm Bill Caruso, founding partner of William Caruso and Partners. This is my 48th year in the business, in the consulting business. We started in the sports and entertainment field, convention centers, stadiums, and arenas, and expanded out to almost every area of discipline or industry segment over the many years.
I'm Scott Heim. I'm the president of Middleby Ventless Cooking Solutions. And with Middleby in the Ventless Cooking Solutions area, we've been getting a lot of the insight on new developments from the FCSI design community. And several years ago, we started with a ventless griddle, and it was really FCSI taking us into the stadiums and arenas that put us on the map when it came to ventless cooking solutions.
Scott, let's stay with you for a second. Can you give us an overview as to why ventless technology is such a good fit for stadia projects?
And when you look at ventless overall, it's the ability to put in a kitchen suite, put in kitchen capabilities into a location that has very tough ventilation. And one of the worst situations would be stadiums and arenas when you're having to go 2, 3, or 4 stories to exhaust and get the smoke, the grease, and the odor out of that facility. So with ventless, we're able to say to the design teams, architects, and most importantly, to those contract food service giants, you now can put a kitchen essentially anywhere in the stadium or arena. And that's important really for 3 things. One, and this is something that Bill Caruso talked about 2 years ago, it's those additional points of sale. It's that impulse sale, that chance to get the incremental ring is going to become more and more important for the stadiums and arenas where they're looking to drive those sales, drive that revenue. So number 1, it's the additional point of sale. Number 2, action stations. Now you have the chance with the ventless cooking solutions to cook out in front of the guest. So you're able to get the people hopefully coming in early before the sporting event or the concert, and they're eating before the event, during the intermission, and if you're allowed under the jurisdiction, stay later and get the revenue afterwards. And then lastly, you can take dead spaces, areas that never could deliver revenue, and you can now create kitchens to serve food and drinks and increase those locations and that hopefully incremental ring for the stadium and arena.
Great, thank you, Scott. Staying with you, what are some of the big pervasive myths that exist about ventless technology, things like compliance, fire department regulations? What are some of those myths that need dispelling, and what are they in the first place?
These were huge, I'll call it beyond even toe-stubbing issues or pinch points. These were enormous barriers that you'll never get the New York Fire Department to approve the equipment. And sure enough, 5 years ago, it was extremely difficult to get into Yankee Stadium. Legends, the food service operator, was wondering, would we ever get the approval? So a lot of those issues on compliance, the authorities having jurisdiction, were issues, especially in North America, 5, maybe even 3 years ago. But that's changed dramatically. Now, a lot of those compliance issues and doubts and skepticism still exist in Europe and in the Middle East with those stadium projects. But the compliance issues in North America have pretty much been resolved.
William, let's go to you first. As a consultant with huge experience in international stadia, does that mirror your experience, what Scott was just commenting on? And are there more pressures now to add additional point of sales continue within stadia?
Very good question, and it's one that I'll cover a little bit in greater detail a bit further on. However, there is a huge difference in the international scene versus the North American scene. And we find that as we get more rural in certain areas, obviously the knowledge factor is a little less than in the major cities. And based on the code compliance, I agree with what Scott said in all areas. But let me just say again, the POS ratio is one of the keys. And quite frankly, now talking post-COVID, the ability for us as planners and designers to create new spaces, touchless technology, to segregate people in more ways, meaning more points of sale, is going to be key. Spreading the entertainment zones out, changing locations on a daily basis if need be, and maintaining total flexibility while increasing POS. And any operator would say this to you, is going to be vitally important. So that is a basis upon which I think ventless technology is going to be bigger and better than ever post-COVID.
Thank you, Bill. And Kristin, would you agree with that? And how much of a game changer has this technology been for the Stadia food service projects that you've worked on specifically?
I would totally agree. When we start in the beginning of a project and programming and trying to figure out how much space we're going to need to accomplish, right? We have X amount of seats, and then from there we back it off. So you start to talk about point of sale ratios, and I've watched that change from 1 to 300 down to 1 to 50 in a premium football situation where halftime's coming in. So they're always talking about so the point of sale expectation from each new building is greater as I've moved along. In addition to that, one of the other factors I always ask as we're determining in the beginning, looking at budget numbers, is how much is cooking and how much is non-cooking. And it used to be cooking was a grill and a non-cooking is a hot dog, big picture. With the advent of the ventless, we're able to keep that ratio of cooking versus non-cooking, the black iron that we're talking about and costs associated, and take those traditional non-cooking stands, we're in that category, and with ventless equipment, able to actually cook food in the stands with the ventless conveyors and combi ovens and things like that. We're able to do cooking where we traditionally would not so before. So in addition to an increase in point of sales, the game changer has been that we can take fresher product and offer something that the consumer wants because they're seeing it made fresh in front of them. It improves quality, and then it again results in higher dollars, higher revenue.
And Chris, over to you. Do you agree? And also, how big is the potential for ventless and the type of projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I definitely agree and would echo all the comments that you heard. The other area is think about all the retrofits. We do a lot of work in the collegiate market, and there you're dealing with, to call those stadiums antiquated, I guess would be a compliment for them. Old world style. They barely have electricity in some cases. So anytime you can increase the menu by increasing the equipment, it's a real plus. So that's been a market that we've seen some great success with to bring in the ventless equipment, because the other thing too is so many of these stadiums were built in sections, and you can't even walk from one side to the other without going up and down levels and all that. So to try to run, as Kristin said, new black iron up to the roof, it isn't going to happen. Plus, nobody has the budget for it anyway. It's been a real positive item to bring to the client and say, consider this idea.
why do you think then there are still some doubters or skeptics considering ventless cooking equipment? Is this just a matter of educating them?
It is. I think familiarity, and I know that Chris and Kristin would agree with me here. Working with the operators, whether they're major operators or minor players in the industry, there are some that are very progressive in terms of, and we usually find it in the local level, like the GM right down in various venues, but some who are very forward-looking, and others who have been very successful but have been tried and true in some of the traditional ways. So familiarity with the product is a key component. And operational knowledge, what does it do? How does it work? One of the big things we always encounter is cost. Well, it must be a lot costlier than the traditional. And here's an interesting thought. In a few cases of major stadiums, not normally, but in a few, not only the black iron has been provided as part of the equipment package, but in some cases, even the hood package is provided. Not very often, but the fact of the matter is, if that's a cost consideration, then other decisions might be made that may or may not be positive in terms of going with the ventless. However, it's basically, how can we less complicate life, and is this good for me? Now, let me just say, it varies in each specific case, however.
Kristin, thinking about some of the recent projects you've worked on, I know some major sports stadia projects. How did ventless cooking units specifically add to production throughput in some of those projects of yours? And also, can existing stadia kitchen just add even more production throughput?
Yeah, I think this goes back when we were just talking about, finding places that we couldn't vent out of. One of the projects I worked on is the Superdome. We all know the iconic, the shape to it. It's not going to look real good with mushroom vents sitting, on top. So in looking for points of sale a few years back, one of the things we did is they came out as called bunker suites. And so they ended up under the bowl creating these suites where high-end premium patrons could come right from the garage through to the club and then out and right out to their seats on the field. This is New Orleans, where everything is deep fried. So now we're underneath the rakers, we're underneath the seats, in the bottom of this bowl, and there was absolutely no way that we were going to be able to get Type 1 hoods out of there. But due to the ability of ventless equipment, we were able to do, griddles and fryers, because again, New Orleans was going to have their fryers in order to meet the menu capability. So they were really a premium product due to the fact that without ventless equipment, it probably wouldn't have been possible to raise the menu to a level that people would have paid in order to make the project move forward. So that was one of, without it, it would not have happened. And we're seeing that in other cases as well. Like I said, in premium spaces, especially as Scott talked about, display cooking action stations. How do we take spaces that are that flexibility point again too? It allows you to take equipment in, do some live cooking, raise the level of it, of the product that you're selling, and then change the space for something else later. So they really have been game changers in what we're able to accomplish and provide.
Thank you, Kristin.
Mike, if I can just build on what Krista just said, that New Orleans Superdome deal, the whole idea of that incremental ring that we've been talking about, tough areas to ventilate, they create these action stations, and at the New Orleans Superdome, you can actually, right on the bun, brand the fleur-de-lis, you get the logo on the bun. So all of a sudden, you got these fans buying their $10 to $12 beers. They see these burgers being cooked right out in front, and they got an incremental $12 double patty cheeseburger being ordered. So those were tangible examples where Centerplate was thrilled with the incremental rings.
Great to hear. Thank you, Scott. Chris, let's look at efficiency gains that ventless can offer. Can it help meet the challenge of a lack of skilled labor in food service, in the food service sector in stadia at all?
No. I hate to tell you that, but no, the thing with ventless, it's not that different from any other piece of equipment. The employees have to be trained. They have to understand how to work with the equipment. And the big thing, particularly with the ventless grills, cleaning is a huge issue because all the filtering and fire suppression, all that is built into the equipment. So it does require daily maintenance. And if we've seen anything where a client says, oh, I hate this thing, it doesn't work. And then we get down there and find out, well, because they've never cleaned it.
Scott, what other technology or features can be applied to ventless cooking in stadiums, and what factors are driving its expansion?
Well, just as Chris was talking about the critical need to maintain the equipment, make sure it's being cleaned based on what the factories require, there is new technology that's just coming to the forefront, and that's with Powerhouse Dynamics, a firm out of Massachusetts. Yes, it's a Middleby company, but with their open kitchen platform, it includes all, and it can incorporate all the equipment. It's not just a Middleby exclusive deal. And what's critical for the operators, whether it's Levy, Delaware North, Legends, you can now link all the equipment and not only monitor the energy use, you also can monitor and help on preventative maintenance to make sure the equipment, those filters, those key elements have been cleaned. And that's going to be something that's crucial as more and more stadiums and arenas do these ventless kitchens.
Kristin, from your experience, how open is the stadia sector in terms of the operators? How open are they to new technology in the kitchen like ventless?
You know, it depends on the operator. The big guys that are running these facilities are very familiar with it because they recognize that it's a place that they can increase revenue, points of sale. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's what we're all in business for, right? Sometimes you get boots on the ground, though. You get someone who's been there for a long time in a smaller facility that hasn't been around a lot. There's opportunities for education and things that we can do differently. Again, it goes back to, like Bill talked about, familiarity and comfortableness. But I think when we're talking about these large venues, most of them, you know, have contract food service providers. The Delaware North, the Levy's, you know, the center plates that we've been talking about, they are fairly knowledgeable on what ventless can bring to and add to the equation.
Bill, we did touch on it briefly earlier, looking at the global appeal of this, as well as just in North America. Do you want to talk about some of your experience internationally with ventless and operators?
Well, I said before that in North America and certain parts of Europe, ventless technology is more well known. There's no question about it. I see Western Europe, parts of Asia, limited parts of Asia as more knowledgeable. However, giving you an example, Central America, South America, other parts of Asia, Russia, etc. There's education that's going to have to happen, and it will happen. Basically, there's about 4 or 5 different reasons for this. There's local and country codes. In some cases, there are no codes, but there's little awareness in some countries as well in terms of some of this technology. Traditional Type 1 hoods in some of the areas that we've dealt with are major issues. So when you talk about ventless, that takes it to a different level. In some cases, new is bad. It's education again. And many people are scared to use equipment, new equipment. That's the same in North America. You get chefs, culinary teams that are not familiar with this type of system. Even though it's simple to operate, it's new. And that means, wow, let's check this out. And of course, enforcement. Some of the operators in foreign countries that we've dealt with are afraid of enforcement agencies. In some countries, enforcement is very strict. And if you're found to be non-compliant, you could be shut down for a long period of time. So where it affects revenues, that's a key ingredient. It's just education, and it's happening now. It's just going to take a little time on the international level.
Scott, do you want to give us the manufacturer perspective on that in terms of global expansion and global appetite for ventless?
I think Bill hit it right on the head. It's a matter of awareness. If the operators aren't really aware of the features, attributes, and most importantly, the benefits, there'll be some resistance. And you look at the opportunities, you just got to pick those showcase areas and work with the design teams and get it done. You look at your backyard. The O2 Arena was built years ago. It was supposed to be a temporary structure. But you look at the O2, they have not been able to upgrade the facility. They desperately need remodel, but there's no way to use a Type 1 hood. You have to use ventless cooking suites to make that work. So again, we have to pick those sites in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, and bring to life the possibilities. You can actually increase the cooking capacity in those stadiums and arenas.
One of the problems or opportunities, depending on how you look at it, is the huge difference between food service in sports venues or concert venues like O2 in Europe, anywhere in the world actually, versus the U.S. When we look at per capita spending in the U.S. and then you compare it to other countries, no offense, Kristin, to this, but Bill and I can do it. They said, well, that's why you guys are all fat. That's all you do is eat all the time. You don't come to see the event, which is absolutely true. And so, a lot of times they'll say, well, it's really nice that we have to have all these points of sale, but we don't need it because our people eat before they come and they eat afterwards. And if you're in the UK, I can't even have my beer and see the pitch. So, we're not going to have the kind of dollar volume that you guys are. So therefore, all of our equipment, ventless, non-ventless, just general refrigeration, anything is going to be much less. The other thing that we've run across, I know when we were doing work in Brazil for the World Cup and all, was power. Trying to get additional power into some of these venues, even the new ones, they just say, we're not bringing that kind of power into it because we know after World Cup's gone, what are we going to have in this building and how often are we going to fill it up? So you're always dealing with the economics of sport dining, let's call it, compared to the U.S. because it is, even Australia, very similar cultures and all that, but spending habits are totally different.
I think you're totally right. And I'll give an example. In our work in Brazil and also in the UK, it's similar in both. It's sort of, let's stop at the pub before the event, get a meat pie and a beer, or a capineira in Brazil and some street food. And then we're not going to buy anything at the event, and then we'll leave and stop on the way out at another place. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
Or is not even heard of, so to speak, in some of these.
I know. In fact, when O2 first opened, one of the concerns, I'm the out-of-town expert. I come in and go, well, your prices are too low. And I realize, learning the UK market, and this is true of a lot of them, you needed to have the high street, as they'd say, main street pricing, because they didn't understand that in a stadium, you may pay $15 for a beer, versus £3 or whatever in the pub. And so that all the economics is totally different.
Let's stay on the economic side of things. Scott, how much in terms of actual cost savings can a ventless platform deliver, and why is it worth the investment for a stadia operator?
Well, as we've discussed different situations in the stadiums and arenas, you're talking 2 or 3 stories to get that Type 1 hood with the ductwork and the flashing and the air compressors and pull all that grease and smoke out. And it's almost impossible in some of these locations. For every story, you're going to add at least $7,000 US to $9,000 per story on top of that whole operation. And then for a lot of the stadiums and arenas, you've got to have that whole system on and operational. You're pulling out that heated air, the air-conditioned air out of that corporate suite. So that's a location that's going to be impossible economically to use a Type 1 hood. Bill Caruso had a great picture of some of these setups that he had done where under escalators or in these corporate suites, where how in the world are you going to duct? You're going to block somebody's view, or you're going to have to cant and angle all that iron and all that ductwork out. So there are truly some impossible locations that can now become pockets of revenue. And why not take advantage? As Kristin said, they're looking now not 300 to 1, it's 50 to 1. So you've got to have more POS, and you can do it with ventless suites.
Yeah, the other thing too, if I can jump in with that the ventless gives you is portability. So with a hood, that hood is where you're going to cook, and that's it, with a permanent hood. With the ventless, if your equipment's on wheels and you have other locations, you can move it down a concourse, you can move it into a banquet room, you can move it a lot of places as events change, which for most operators, they want as much multi-purpose space in their venues as possible. So the ventless allows that, whereas you could never do that with fixed cooking spaces.
What we also find is, I think in design, we're constantly fighting form versus function. And so when we come into these spaces, these high-end spaces where you have interior designers that have beautiful ideas on what they want to do, you come in and you plop a hood up there and it makes all the noise and it looks ugly and it's a fixed area. a lot of that starts to go away when you can have the ventless cooking. It incorporates itself into an interior design package versus, sticking out and you see the food in the process more.
Great. Thank you,
Let me
Kristin.
just jump in real
Sure,
quickly.
Bill.
I'll give you some great examples of some great environments that all of us have worked on in stadiums where we've incorporated this. Things like field level boxes, dugout boxes, where people couldn't even get to before. What about pool decks where we've got pools like in Arizona? Somebody's out on a beach, or in Miami at Dolphin Stadium out on a beach with a pool. Bring the product right to them. Now you can cook right in front of them on the sand. Or even in parking lots. Years ago, we set up a store in a parking lot, but now you can actually set up a pop-up. We never even talked about all the pop-up restaurants. Critical component, great opportunity for Ventless. Sorry to jump in, guys, but
Not at all, Bill.
those examples.
Let's stay with you, and I'd like to get all of your opinions on this as a final question. Bill, ultimately, where do you think ventless technology in a sort of post-COVID-19 environment will take us, and how do you think the technology will evolve in the future for Stadia food service specifically?
I think that post-COVID, the opportunity for ventless technology is unlimited. The technology lends itself to creating more points of services, more small entertainment zone opportunities, both inside and outside of stadiums and arenas. And that's critically important in defining and in maintaining both profitability and also safety and security health-wise. So I believe the future really is unlimited. And I think that the costs will come down over time as well. Certainly it's competitive now with Type 1 traditional hoods, but it'll even get more competitive as time goes on and the use becomes more widespread.
The days of the self-service buffet are toast. They're gone. And so everything that we do is going to be a chef, a cook, a server handing the food to the customer. If you have to get rid of the traditional buffet, but you can have an attractive display cooking with the Evo grill, for example, and that cook is grilling the product right there in front of the customer, that's something that is going to drive sales. One of the things all the operators are grappling with right now is post-COVID is going to be higher labor costs. There's got to be more employees to produce the same amount of product that customers used to be able to help themselves, and free refills and all the self-service options. So the idea, if you can have an employee that's actually cooking in front of the customer, there's no question in my mind that's going to drive sales.
One of the things that I think where there's an area where we can see future expansion on ventless, when we talk about cost savings, there's a direct cost savings when you're looking at a new construction versus, putting in an Evo griddle versus putting in the black iron. But what we have to, and same thing, with ventless fryers and things like that. What we have to be able to look at, I think, for this to continue to expand, and some of the things I run into is, once that hood is put in, that's a one-time cost. The replacement of this ventless equipment, it can only be compared to the install cost the first time. As this has to be replaced, when it starts, if a ventless piece of equipment is 2 times the cost of a standard piece of equipment, it starts, or if the filters or the maintenance become operational costs, we have to look at that. So I think for this to completely keep evolving, we have to do 2 things. Number one, we have to look at the long-term costs associated so that it makes sense when we're trying to convince more people that it's the right thing to do. And number 2, the production and throughput of some of this. You can buy a 6-foot traditional griddle somewhere for high-end production. You can't right now, those type of things. We're limited to size and function. Even if you go with the ventless hood over some of this equipment, we're limited to the amount of KWs that we can put through. So there are limitations on larger pieces of equipment. It's great for all the things that we talked about, and it's a game changer, no doubt. But if we really want to see this permeating the industry, I think there's a couple of things we have to look to as far as that as well.
There are so many things that are happening with the stadiums and arenas based on the consumer demand. Again, the proliferation of the food shows, all the food networks where everyone now is involved, the baby boomers such as ourselves taking all of our kids and expose them to the international cuisine. They're expecting action. They're expecting theater even on meal preparation at the stadium and arena. And with the ventless suites, why tuck the star of what could be a nice enhancement at that stadium and arena? Why tuck the food behind the walls? Bring it out in front of these action stations. And especially now with the post-COVID-19 situation, the customer, the consumer is going to want to see the food being cooked in front. It reinforces freshness and perhaps even helps with food safety if they see the food being cooked and handled appropriately by that staff at the stadium or arena. In terms of other developments, innovations, there are several ideas that are in the works right now to bring other cooking ideas up front that could also help cut back on the labor.
On that very positive note, I think we need to leave it there. Thank you guys for a very absorbing discussion and debate on this subject. I'd like to thank our expert panelists, Kristin, Chris, Bill and Scott, and thank you for watching. Thank you.